And next I have the former Justice Department prosecutor we all know and love, James Trusty, is here for us. I remember a few weeks ago there was a similar question along these lines, and I asked you, what about the president and X, Y, or Z? And you said, well, the Supreme Court has actually never even dealt with that. It is not settled law. In your opinion, when the president's talking about all these scholars that say that he can pardon himself, is he correct?
Well, Dana, it hasn't changed in the last few weeks. It's a situation where whether the founding fathers anticipated this exact issue or not, we'll never know. People can read into the silence of Article 2 in either direction, and no case has ever had to deal with this issue. No court has ever had to deal with this issue. So whether it was Andrew Johnson or Bill Clinton or Richard Nixon, nobody has gotten to this level where they have their lawyers talking about the possibility of self-pardon. And again, not shockingly, sometimes lawyers disagree, and you've got lawyers on both sides of this issue.
Right. Well, and it's also certainly just so hypothetical right now that that's not even there. But what might be a little bit closer is something that the president has been talking about as well, and his lawyer Rudy Giuliani talking about it, which is in regards to a subpoena, and what the president would have to respond to that. Listen to Judge Andrew Napolitano on it earlier today.
In a criminal investigation, your executive privilege is radically narrowed to diplomatic secrets, military secrets, and sensitive national security secrets. Everything else, you have to cough up, whether by documents or testimony, just like anybody else. Why Mayor Giuliani and why the writers of this 20-page letter, which is now 6 months old, overlooked this ruling, which is the governing, controlling ruling in the case, is beyond me.
So this actually is something I think that Rudy Giuliani's been talking a little bit more about. He says his client, the president, does want to take questions from Robert Mueller. You and other lawyers have said, I don't think that would be a good idea, not what you would advise your client, but at the end of the day, the client is going to decide what the client decides. On this issue of being compelled to testify, has that been settled by the courts?
Well, I think the judge is right that on the grounds of executive privilege, it's very narrowly drawn, kind of favors the ability of the chief executive to not talk about national security issues that should remain private. So you don't have the ability to completely walk away from this subpoena, but that doesn't mean you can't fight it. And I think that the Giuliani team could certainly file motions to quash or to dismiss the subpoena that could get some traction. They could very much challenge the investigation, its motivations, how long and expensive it's been. They could have a very publicly available document that they would file to try to get rid of this subpoena. And what's interesting is the government might still be constrained by what's called Rule 6, which means grand jury secrecy, where their responses are actually under lock and key. So you could have a very one-sided debate in public while a very private and more legal-based debate is taking place in front of a judge.
So and then who does that favor, if it's a public debate versus a secret debate?
Well, if it's a public debate and you're the only side swinging publicly, it's going to be pretty nice, right? So I would think that the White House team, Team Giuliani, would be able to frame the issue in a way that's favorable to their client and get that document out publicly, and it would say a lot. They could really be very expansive in terms of attacking the bona fides of Team Mueller.
Interesting. All right, let me ask you then about the second thing. June is always a month where the Supreme Court gives us a lot of these decisions. This issue about the cake baker has been one that people were hoping that there would be some clarity on the issue. The ruling was 7-2, which is not narrow, as some had described it, but it actually was a decision that was actually fairly narrow and doesn't answer all of the questions. How did you read it?
I think that's right. I mean, the bottom line, Dana, is Justice Kennedy very obviously grappling with two competing notions: the tension between making people be respectful of those who they may differ with, of the government making people more tolerant, but also the government not railroading deeply held religious beliefs. And so that's the tension, and everybody was looking to see if this cake case was going to kind of decide which ones of those competing interests wins, and it really doesn't, because the case comes down to very much its own facts. Justice Kennedy goes overboard, saying time and time again, you know, everyone needs to be treated with dignity. This is a very limited ruling, and it really is. I mean, it's basically acknowledging there's going to be a lot more cases that come down the pike before we really have any deeper sense of where that divide lies, how that tension gets resolved.
So, but in your mind, do you think that the Supreme Court ruled that on behalf of proponents of what would be called religious liberty in that argument?
Well, mildly so, but again, it's really not as much of a big policy call as it was limited by the facts. The facts of the case included the fact that the commission, the government, was very heavy-handed, where they were very dismissive of religious beliefs from the get-go, where they were somewhat hypocritical. They ruled in favor of a baker who refused to have anti-gay slurs on his cakes. So at the end of the day, the court basically said, look, you're being inconsistent when you respect moral convictions. You are wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And we don't respect that in terms of the First Amendment allowing governments to act that way.
One last question, then. We only have about 45 seconds left. There are rumors in Washington, D.C., and I'm up here in New York, so you tell me if you've heard these rumors, that Justice Kennedy is thinking of retiring and that announcement could even come before the end of this month. That would be significant for the court, for President Trump, for Americans everywhere. What do you think might happen?
Well, I think there's more rumors about the Caps game tonight, but down here. But I do think that it's fair game to start speculating about a number of justices. There has been talk about Justice Kennedy historically. I don't have any sort of inside track to that. But he's been a swing vote on a lot of important cases. And so I think it'll be a very important moment if he decides to step down and we go through this process with the president nominating someone who can get through the Senate. It's going to be, no matter what the bona fides, no matter what the actual merits are, that's going to be a huge pitched battle, I'm sure. Well,
I know you're a big Caps fan. I know there's a big game 4 tonight, so good luck with that one. James Trusty, thank you.
All right, thanks.